Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Expanding Childcare Access with the CHIPS Act. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Linda Smith. I'm the director of the Early Childhood Initiative at the Bipartisan Policy Center here in Washington, D.C. BPC is a Washington, D.C. based think tank where we try to take the best ideas from both sides of the aisle to propose policies that address the nation's most pressing problems. And obviously, childcare is tops among the problems facing our country right now. So today, what we're going to do is be talking with people from the Department of Commerce about the CHIPS Act. Last year, Congress passed the Bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act, which provides approximately $50 billion to boost America's competitiveness by increasing domestic production of microprocessors. Over the next few years, the Department of Commerce will award $39 billion in grants and loans to renovate and expand production of microprocessors and facilities for the production of those. This will create approximately 190,000 new jobs, and of course, along with that comes a need for more childcare. To help meet this need, the Department of Commerce is requiring applicants requesting direct funding over $150 million, to submit a plan to provide access to childcare. So to help us understand this, we have invited two people from the Department of Commerce to join us today to explain what is going on with their application process. But before I get to that, I want to introduce my colleague and friend and the partner in our work on much of the business side of the work we do at BPC, the U.S. Chamber Foundation. For the last 2 years, as many of you know, between the foundation and BPC, we have been sponsoring the work of what we call the Early Childhood and Business Advisory Council. And that work is to expand access to childcare around the country. And I'm going to have my friend and colleague from the U.S. Chamber Foundation, Caitlin Codell-Lowe. I want to introduce her first and have her tell you a little bit more about that work we're doing together on that, and then we'll get on with the panel. So Caitlin, thank you so much for the support that you've given to this project, to our business work and our business relations, and especially in this work right now with the Department of Commerce.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation is thrilled to co-host this conversation with the Bipartisan Policy Center. We know childcare is a two-generation workforce issue. It is essential in supporting the workforce of today, and it's crucial in developing the workforce of tomorrow. The Chamber and Chamber Foundation have supported the business community for a number of years as employers have increasingly engaged in community-level childcare initiatives, and we're focused on providing support and guidance to the semiconductor industry to help them comply with the new childcare requirements. Through newly developed resources and information sharing sessions like this one, our goal is to facilitate opportunities not just for chips manufacturers, but for all businesses to take on a community-led approach to finding sustainable solutions to local childcare challenges. As Linda mentioned, today's conversation is an outgrowth of the Early Childhood and Business Advisory Council that the Chamber and BPC launched in partnership a little less than 2 years ago. The council engages the business community and key early childhood stakeholders in supporting the expansion of high-quality, affordable childcare in communities and states across the country. This joint initiative facilitates conversations to help state and local chambers and groups devise an action plan for how to best tackle the most pressing childcare needs that they are faced in their communities. I think we are thrilled to say that this work expanded. The council expanded from 9 states to 13 states, and those include Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Idaho, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, Montana, North Carolina, Ohio, South Dakota, and Texas. So thanks again to the Bipartisan Policy Center team for co-hosting this learning session, and thank you to our guests from the Department of Commerce for spending their time with us today.
Thank you, Caitlin. And it's just worth noting here that we first presented this to the Early Childhood Council that we have, and it was such a rich conversation that we thought this would be a great webinar for the rest of the country. So thank you to Caitlin and to the Chamber for all the support on this. Now I want to turn to our two guests. The first to join us will be Jessie Stoneman. Jessie is the Deputy Director of Public Engagement for the Chips for America team. Prior to her time at the Department of Commerce, she served in the front office of the U.S. Trade Representative in the Executive Office of the President. The second guest is Liat Krawczyk. Liat is a Senior Advisor of Workforce and Head of Childcare Strategy for Chips for America. Prior to her time at the Department of Commerce, Liat served as the President and Head of Industry Economic Mobility and the founder of the Child Care Innovation Lab at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Wow, that was a long title. I guess that was a lot to get on a business card. In any event, thank you both for joining me. I'm going to turn it over first to Jessie, who is going to walk us through what has happened here and where they are right now in terms of the Chips for America and childcare.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the very kind introduction, Linda and Caitlin. And thank you also so much for having us. We are really thrilled to be speaking with you today. So to begin, I'm going to be providing a brief and high-level overview of the Chips for America program and really an update on what we have accomplished thus far, where we are today, and where we're going, before I turn it over to Liat to really dive into the childcare-focused content here. And I will be moving quite quickly through this, but please know that there is a tremendous amount of information, resources, fact sheets, guides, FAQs, and more on our website at chips.gov. So if you're interested in learning more, we would strongly encourage you to do so. So we're really excited to be walking you through the Chips for America childcare requirements here and talking about how you as employers and as stakeholders in this issue can really take a range of actions to support caregiver employees. And with that, we'll go to the next slide, please. To begin, I'd like to very briefly share the overall vision of the Chips for America program. And really, there are three major policy reasons for the Chips for America Fund: economic security, national security, and future innovation. And ultimately, we need to establish semiconductor chip production here in the US to protect our economic and national security. Next slide, please. To achieve this vision, this ambitious vision, Congress created two categories of programs that the Department of Commerce will implement. The first is the $39 billion manufacturing incentives program, and the second is the $11 billion R&D program. And we are actually working with a variety of other agencies across the federal government to implement other sort of pieces of the Chips for America program. And that's DoD, that's the Department of State, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of Treasury. And for today's purposes, the purposes of today's conversation, really focusing in on childcare, will be focused on the $39 billion in manufacturing incentives program. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of where we are in the program today, to really achieve the vision that we've laid out here, we've outlined several different funding opportunities. So far, we've made two announcements related to funding opportunities. The first was geared towards commercial chip makers, and we released that in late February. And then in June, we followed up and released a funding opportunity for larger supply chain projects, which we've defined as over $300 million in capital investments. And very soon, we'll be releasing an additional funding opportunity for smaller supply chain projects. And in the coming months, another and final opportunity, funding opportunity for the construction of R&D facilities. Thus far, the Department of Commerce has received more than 500 statements of interest for projects across 42 states. So to say that there has been engagement and interest in this program would be a huge understatement. And we've actually also received 100 pre-applications and full applications just from the first 2 funding opportunities alone. So lots and lots of work has been happening in the Department of Commerce on this program. Next slide, please. Really, in order to achieve the ambition of this vision that we have set forth, we are prioritizing each of the areas that are listed on this slide. They are all incredibly important to this work, but for today's discussion, I want to emphasize the importance of building a skilled and diverse workforce and the extent to which recruiting, training, and retaining a large, skilled, and diverse workforce will be critical to strengthening the U.S. semiconductor ecosystem. Companies that are seeking CHIPS funding are required to submit workforce development plans for both their construction and their facility workforces. And that includes plans to meet the Biden administration's good jobs principles. And additionally, within these requirements, and really what we'll focus on today, applicants requesting over $150 million in CHIPS funding must submit plans to provide their facility and their construction workers with access to affordable, accessible, reliable, and high-quality childcare. And why are we doing this? We're doing this because we have heard from chip companies that they need help recruiting and retaining more workers. And Secretary Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce, who leads us here at the Department of Commerce, has really spoken a lot on this issue. We really cannot achieve the national security objectives of this program if we aren't able to build and staff these facilities on time and on budget. And so fundamentally, this is an economic issue. Having a trained and skilled workforce is absolutely essential to the successful completion of these projects. And so we'll continue to work with companies to help ensure that they have the workforce that they need. Next slide, please. Before handing this over to Liat, I just wanted to spend a couple final minutes talking about our overall workforce development vision. We need all hands on deck to meet the scale of this ambition here. And to deliver on the national security objectives that we've laid out and to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, we need to build a really strong semiconductor workforce, and we will not have that workforce unless more of America's workers have the chance to get into these jobs. And really, America's diversity is a huge competitive advantage, but only if everyone really has the opportunity to participate and to be rewarded for their talents, including folks from underserved communities. And so by building a vibrant semiconductor workforce that is skilled, that is diverse, and that's inclusive, we believe that we will bolster US leadership and competitiveness in one of the most critical technologies of our time, and will ensure that more of America's workers can really share in this prosperity. And really, what does this require? It requires a whole of society approach. The program is going to be prioritizing workforce solutions that bring key stakeholders together. And that includes employers, that includes economic development organizations, community-based groups, childcare providers and others in the childcare space, of course, training institutions, labor unions, and we expect much, much more. And really, we want to bring everyone together around this unified goal so that we can meet the ambitious goals of this program. So with that, I will now hand it over to my colleague, Liat.
Thank you, Jessie. And now that we've really given you a big picture on CHIPS, let's dive into the childcare requirement. And if we can go to the next slide, one more, please. So before we really get into the details of the program, I do want to spend a few minutes giving a quick overview of the US childcare crisis to really ground ourselves. I think it will quickly become clear that we cannot afford to have a conversation about the workforce without talking about childcare. As we know, childcare is unaffordable for a huge amount of Americans. The average cost of US childcare is almost $11,000 per child per year, which is approximately 15% of median household income. And in 34 states and DC, the average cost of center-based childcare for infants is more than college tuition. And even though families are spending an exorbitant percent of their household incomes on care, that's often not enough to actually cover the costs of providing care. And as such, we don't have enough childcare seats across the nation. Over 50% of Americans live in what we call a childcare desert, which means there are at least 3 kids for every licensed slot. And of course, in many places, the situation is much more dire. For example, 50 kids for every licensed spot. The situation is, of course, even worse for families whose work non-traditional hours, where only 8% of all childcare centers offer any sort of care between the hours of 6 p.m. and 7 a.m. So, it's no wonder that less than 25% of construction and manufacturing workers, which are the workers that are critical to achieve our CHIPS program, that they have childcare available for the hours that they need, including non-traditional hours. And finally, there is variation in childcare quality in many cases because childcare providers are paid very poor wages and often have to leave those jobs for those reasons. So if we go to the next slide, we really understand that the cost of lack of access to care has dire effects on 3 primary stakeholders of care, namely employers, households, and the economy at large. So on the business end, employers lose about $23 billion a year to childcare challenges faced by employees with 0 to 3-year-olds alone. On the other hand, care supports are critical to talent. So caregivers value childcare at the same level as other benefits, such as salary, paid time off, or healthcare when they seek a new role. Over 70% of working caregivers say that better childcare would make them more productive. And over 80% of parents with kids ages 0 to 5 have said that childcare benefits would be an important factor in retention. On the household end, a 2023 report shows that 26% of parents with kids 0 to 3 quit a job, 23% were fired, 17% were demoted, 40% turned down a job, and 25% turned down a promotion due to childcare challenges. And as a result, families lose almost $80 billion a year in foregone earnings and job search expenses due to these challenges. Of course, this affects the U.S. economy at large. The nation's infant toddler crisis now costs about over $120 billion in lost earnings, productivity, and revenue, and taxpayers lose about $21 billion each year in lower federal and local tax revenue. And again, I want to note that this does not even include the economic effects of childcare challenges for 4 to 5-year-olds, or the economic effects on other generations, such as grandparents who may leave the workforce to care for their grandchildren, or kids for whom, of course, investments in care have long-term economic effects that can be greater than $7 for every dollar invested in high-quality early childhood education. So if we go to the next slide, please. Diving into CHIPS, we recognize the essential importance of childcare to the sector. Industry simply cannot succeed to the same extent if workers do not have access to childcare. And this is particularly true in the type of tight labor markets in the sectors that are critical to CHIPS, such as construction, where unemployment rates are at historical lows, and where there is not enough talent to take from existing pools of labor, and where we need to enable more people to enter these jobs by building the infrastructure to do so. So in order to achieve the CHIPS Act's economic and national security objectives and ensure that everyone, including caregivers who are, of course, disproportionately women, can participate and thrive in the U.S. Semiconductor economy, we therefore require first, that CHIPS applicants applying for over $150 million are required to provide a childcare plan for both facility and construction workers. And secondly, for those CHIPS applicants that do not meet the $150 million threshold, we still strongly encourage that they too provide a childcare plan. Next slide, please. Now, we know there are no one-size-fits-all solutions when it comes to childcare. So we ask applicants to really think about the local contexts in order to design care offerings. So for one, we expect applicants to devise database solutions responsive to the specific needs of their workers. We really encourage employers to understand who their employees are, how many are parents, how many are parents to young kids, and what their childcare needs are. So for example, construction and facility workers may have different preferences for where care facilities are located. Parents who work non-traditional hours may have distinct needs from those who work traditional hours, and household makeup might also be critical to the type of supports that a worker needs. Ultimately, we really just want to make sure that employers will design solutions that are in line with worker needs so that offerings have high utilization rates and translate into the type of business success metrics that we are looking for in this program, such as talent attraction, retention, productivity, diversification. In addition to that, we also really encourage applicants to work with community stakeholders, including local governments and other groups with expertise administering childcare, to create effective solutions. So first of all, working with local communities will really give employers an idea of what resources already exist for workers in the community. It will also give a good sense of what the wider community needs are, so applicants can consider solutions that both serve employees and also might help build local childcare infrastructure. And finally, conversations with local stakeholders may allow employers to capitalize on any existing local, state, or federal incentives or other innovative models that can help employers really defray the cost of offering care. Next slide, please. Once employers really have a solid understanding of what's happening on the ground, they can really provide a plan to grant both facility and construction workers with affordable, reliable, accessible, and high quality care. So just to dive a little bit further into each one of these, on affordability, we really encourage applicants to consider defraying the price of care so that it's within reach for low and medium income households. On accessibility, care should be at a convenient location with hours that meet worker needs and no long wait lists. On reliability, offerings like backup care and predictable schedules can be very helpful in ensuring that workers have the care that they need consistently. And finally, on quality, our workforce development guide really provides a number of metrics and accreditation systems that might be useful. And as a general matter, high quality care providers can be found in both licensed and informal care settings. And the type of things that you can consider thinking about here include ensuring that caregivers are paid a living wage, participating in quality rating programs, and providing the ability to care for children with special needs. Next slide, please. Now, I do want to spend a few minutes providing some examples of models that employers can consider when offering care. We will be diving much more in depth into how employers can go about developing these plans in a webinar that we'll be holding in the next couple of months. But in the meantime, just to give you a short overview, one option for employers is to really choose to build on or near site care, either directly or via a third-party vendor who specializes in such services. Companies can also decide to expand the capacity of existing providers in the community that might be located offsite. So for example, employers can work with centers or home-based providers to expand their seat capacity or extend their hours of operation. And these type of solutions can help meet employee needs while also bolstering those local ecosystems. If employers prefer to have more choice in terms of facilities, for example, if workers want home or center-based daycare options near their homes, employers can really work with childcare network partners to offer solutions that help identify, secure, and fund workers' preferred form of care without needing to do a lot of the heavy administrative lift. Similarly to expanding the capacity of existing providers, companies can serve their employees and support the larger care infrastructure by helping to build the capacity of local networks, such as supporting centralized functions, like defraying the cost of tools and administrative resources needed to run these networks. And in addition, companies can also look to solutions that help workers organize their own cooperatives. Finally, a company may also defray the cost of care. And there's multiple ways to do that. That could be either via a care-specific or general well-being stipend. It could be by helping eligible workers secure vouchers which also often enable friends, family, or neighbors to get paid for their care work, or offering flexible dependent care spending accounts. Now, the flexibility in usage of funds, I think, is important to note here, to really allow parents to choose the type of care they prefer, and to give them those wide options that could meet the full spectrum of needs that they face. Given the diverse needs of employees, employers will often choose to layer these options to account for both the accessibility and affordability challenges that present themselves. So, for example, an employer may offer an on-site or expanded facility option for daytime facility workers, pair that with an off-site location of their choice, and then also grant a stipend that workers can choose to use in the way that they wish for the care supports that they choose, whether that's paying a facility directly or using informal care supports such as family, friends, and neighbors for overnight care. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jessie to talk a little bit more about next steps.
Great, thank you, Liat. So we covered a lot of ground, and we're not done yet. We still have some questions to answer and are excited to engage with all of you. But before we do that, just wanted to make sure that you have access to all of the resources that we have put out on our website. CHIPS.gov is really the key takeaway here, the key thing to remember. We've got our notices of funding opportunity on there, where there's detailed language about the specific requirements related to childcare that we've covered today. We also have our workforce development planning guide, which again has more details, and it's specifically geared towards helping applicants think through how they can create a robust childcare plan for their application. We also have a variety of FAQs, and we have other webinars that we've shared with the public, recordings of those presentations on there. So lots of great stuff to check out. I also wanted to highlight a resource that we released just a couple months ago, which we call the Teaming Partner List. The Teaming Partner List is, as it sounds, a place where organizations who are not eligible to apply directly for funding themselves, but are interested in potentially partnering with an applicant, can go to add their information. And that's added to a public list that's updated regularly, which applicants and others can access, and can help potentially facilitate partnerships in this space, which we are very excited about. If you have questions that we aren't able to get to today, we've listed some contact emails here, and we do hope that you will reach out. And with that, I will turn it back over to Linda. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you both for the great presentation, a lot of information, and I can already tell you that we already have many questions coming in. So I want to get started on that. But before we get to the audience questions, we have a few that we wanted to pose to you, and I want to bring Caitlin back in on this one as well. I think the first one is one that's on the minds of a lot of people in terms of the expansion versus the existing care issue. And I know you all have been asked this question before. What is the department doing in the CHIPS program to ensure that we're not displacing children currently in childcare programs, and that we're making sure that this is money going to expanding care? And just a quick question on that, because I know you've heard that one before. So I don't know, Jessie, do you want to take that one first, or Liat?
Liat, over to you.
Thanks, Linda. Thank you for that question. It's of course top of mind for us as we work through the program, and we are working very closely with childcare experts and advocates across the nation to really make sure that we're communicating the importance of both providing childcare for employees and encouraging employers to really seek out those local partnerships, including working with local providers and stakeholders who often have decades of experience in the community and know these family realities up close. I think what's really important here, again, we talked about some of the options that could be helpful to bolstering a lot of that local ecosystem. I think what I would say to stakeholders on the ground is that it's really important for stakeholders who know what the local realities and needs are to be very clear about what those are when they're communicating with employer partners, right? So what are the investments that the community really needs that employers can realistically support? What timelines would be needed to build out these type of investments? And what are the outcomes, both for employers' direct employees and the community at large? So for example, is it an investment in the local childcare network, right? As we mentioned, for an administrator, or to buy the type of technology that's needed to really bolster local home-based providers that serve employees in the region? Is it investing in the pipeline of early education so that there are enough there's enough talent to both meet the needs of families who already are within the system, as well as all the future families that might be coming to a region? Is it considering, reserving a number of slots in a facility for the larger community? Is it a shared fund that will invest in childcare? There are obviously a lot of options that communities are thinking about. And I think the clearer stakeholders can be in communicating and garnering support around specific needs and specific ways that employers and communities can work together, I think that will be very helpful in creating a clear picture of where an employer can consider playing a role.
Mm-hmm. I want to bring Caitlin in on this question as well, because we've had questions already in the chat, but also we've had questions about, first of all, what can the early childhood people on this call look to do in terms of, how do they start something in their community if they know that something is coming and they haven't heard anything? Where do they go? What is the first start point for that? And then the same, and Caitlin and I have talked about this issue with businesses. Where do the businesses in the community start if they want to engage in this?
Yeah, I mean, on the case of business, I think this is probably the best place to start, right? Joining these conversations, listening about the bevy of options that are available in terms of the role that you as an individual business can play, the role that you as an ecosystem, or, the role that a chamber can play in communities to identify the challenges that exist, right? To Liat's point, 50% plus of the US is a childcare desert. How many of us know if we are in that place or not, right? And so figuring out where the challenges exist in your community is the first step. And then also, I think, similarly, and Linda, this is something that we have discovered time and time again as a part of our 2-year partnership in states, is finding that counterpart that you're able to sort of think about, how do we solve this together? I would say for the business community, certainly the chamber has a huge amount of resources that are at your disposal to think about the role that you play in this. I would call out the childcare roadmap solutions for working parents in identifying a bevy of resources that exist where you can start. We always say start with a survey, identify the challenges that exist within your workforce right now, and then work at solving what those challenges are. In some surveys, the number one challenge that comes up that has already been discussed is predictive scheduling. And that is actually, there's an easy place to land in terms of solutions around that. So figure out the problem that you're solving, and then figure out the counterpart to that problem that you're able to sort of work in a community to identify who is your partner and how you can get to solutions.
Thank you. Any thoughts on this, Liat or Jesse?
I think one place that community stakeholders can go if they want to, access a lot of the employers that might be coming to their region is really starting maybe with their economic development agencies regionally, as well as, again, looking at the teaming list that we have online, where employers can browse and understand who are their partners on the ground. And again, the easier it is to navigate some of, we all know, are often very complicated systems to navigate and locally when it comes to childcare. And the fact that many regions look differently in terms of how childcare is organized and what kind of what kind of organizations are playing what kind of role on the ground. I think coming to an economic development agency who's playing a counter role to the employer can be one place to start.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this one, we've had a couple of questions about, well, the first one is, will you make these plans available to the public so people will ultimately be able to see what communities are doing? And I think the point there is to learn from each other on what some solutions might be. Do you see that happening? And if so, when?
Oh, go ahead, Liat.
Go ahead, no.
Yeah, so I was going to say, given the really critical need to protect confidential business information through the application process, we do not foresee releasing the child care plans that are submitted as part of an application.
Do you think there's going to be any way that we can capture, models that worked well? Not so much what was in the application, but I think what the country is really hungry for, what are some of the solutions in some of these challenges? And it looks like you're providing a lot of opportunity to try new things.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, first of all, these are long-term initiatives, and I do hope that we will learn from a lot of the models and employers will institute. And again, like, I think a lot of what we are trying to do on these webinars, and we will be having webinars as well that do focus a lot more on the how, is to give those type of solution examples that are very concrete, so that employers can really understand what are their options, what are the type of partners, how do they begin to think about serving the needs of their employees, how do they think about capturing ROI of the type of offerings that they're granting, how do they iterate on the type of benefits that they're giving. All of these are very concrete things that employers can be doing in this space, and we do hope to be able to walk employers through these type of issues.
A question that we've got a couple of times here in the chat is, essentially, how are you going to hold these companies to these plans? Is the Commerce Department going to do something to make sure that they follow through with this once they have the funding?
Liat, do you want to take that one, or would you like me to?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so part of what will happen through the application process is reaching sort of agreements on a case-by-case basis, based on the application evaluation criteria that we've shared, including, of course, the workforce development requirements and the child care requirement. And so through the application process, an agreement will be reached on sort of the kind of key terms of a negotiation. And based on that, also, there will be the opportunity to potentially claw back dollars if commitments that have been agreed upon are not reached.
Interesting. Okay, so here's another question. We're kind of skipping around because I went right to some of the audience questions because we have several, and this one is really, I think, good and something that our audience is particularly interested in. I think it says, I live in an area that will soon feel the growing pain of a large economic development project. Additionally, there is talk that a CHIPS facility may be located in the same area. There's a lot of talk about the need to expand the supply of quality childcare, but I don't see any coordination or real action on this. If I want to be a part of a solution, where do I start? And it seems like we need a convener to bring it together. Who would that be? And I think this one could go to everyone. And Caitlin, you may have some thoughts on this as well. But that is really going to be one of the challenges, is at the local community level. Where do you start?
Certainly. I think this is something that we hear about. Frankly, this has been a talking point well before CHIPS, right? Like, I think we have been dealing with the growing pains of economic development, and childcare is absolutely a piece of that. My humble suggestion is that I would start at your local chamber, have conversation to identify, call this out as the issue that you are seeing, that you are experiencing, and that you're community partners are experiencing, figure out if there's action being done, certainly figure out if there's action being done there, but also figure out, who the community partners are that are thinking about this every single day. That's the starting part that I think, we all need to be thinking about, frankly, as certainly chips manufacturing plants pop up across the country, but many, jobs of all sorts. And what does that mean for the community, whether it be through transportation, whether it be through childcare, whether it be through healthcare, right? You name it. This is the place where I think personally business leaders come together and action is done as a result. And that's what I think is so exciting about this opportunity to rethink and, dig into childcare and the childcare challenge that we're experiencing.
Liat, how about you on that one? When you get asked that question cold from an audience, where do you recommend they go?
Yeah, so again, I think the situations on the ground look so different depending on where you are. So there's not always a natural answer that will be the same across the board, right? So again, I do think economic development agencies are increasingly considering childcare as an economic issue and are often the conveners of public-private partnerships that are occurring on the ground. Certainly echoing Caitlin's point about chambers being a great place to start as well. I think we are seeing increasingly a lot more public-private conversations happening across the nation. So really hoping that becomes, more robust. And I think that's what we're seeing over time. And as these spaces mature, I think that will become more of a norm across the board, where it will become clearer who your counterpart is locally.
Mm-hmm. Another question that we have and that we are interested in here at BPC are registered apprenticeships. And there's a question, do you work with registered apprenticeships, i.e. the Department of Labor? And are they working in any areas that you know of?
Yeah, so our team, we're focusing on childcare, but certainly we're thinking about, how employers, first of all, can support apprenticeships for early childhood education, first of all. And there are opportunities for both public and private sector to help accelerate or test those type of models locally. Of course, we have the larger workforce type of endeavors that we're focusing on for facility and construction workers, where I think a lot of communities are also thinking about the role of apprenticeships in the type of roles that we're going to be seeing, such as technician roles and otherwise. So I think certainly across the board, apprenticeships are a relevant option.
I would add, and we'll try and drop in the chat a link to a report we just did on registered apprenticeships, because we've seen a tremendous growth of those in childcare over the last couple of years. So that's another one. Are the employers who are applying for listed anywhere? I mean, if somebody thought they were going to take, for instance, the person who asked the question about, she heard that the chip company or chip something was coming to her area. Is there any way for these people to know where they are?
It's a great question, and similar to what I shared previously, given the confidential nature of the application process, the real priority placed on confidential business information, at this time, we are not sharing any information about who has applied specifically. Our hope, I was going to say that just our hope is that the teaming partner list can be a helpful resource in that regard, as we hope that both applicants and those who are not applying will be able to use that as a resource to help connect for potential partnerships.
Okay. And then sort of adding on to that, there was also a question about, is there a list of childcare providers and advocates that you're working with? I think you mentioned in the briefing some reference to working with others around the country. Is there a list of those people anywhere, or are they on the teaming partners list by any chance?
Yeah, the teaming partner list would be another great place where certainly childcare advocates could could also participate, add their names, and kind of create connections. And certainly, connections between applicants and non-applicant entities is one vision for the list, but also connections and partnerships between non-applicants it could be another real benefit of the list. And so perhaps forging new partnerships in the community between advocacy groups and other kind of childcare focused organizations, chambers, et cetera, could be possible through that too. That's our hope, is that it helps kind of foment a lot of that collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Then there's a follow-on to that one as well, and it says, understanding that you won't be sharing the plans, but are you planning on sharing a list of applicants ultimately, or is that also, it won't be available, and so that local stakeholders can reach out to them, was the reason be?
Of course. At this time, it's sort of the same answer, which is, given the confidential nature of the application process, we are not able to share information on who has applied just yet.
And then this one I think is a quick one, because I think that you've already said this. The question is, will grantees be able to use the funding to build childcare facilities? Liat.
I mean, we are, every applicant, if they are awarded funds, will use it to build out the needs that they have to build a facility workforce. So, we're not, maybe Jesse, you can answer this probably more robustly than I can, knowing childcare specifically.
Yeah, so there's a specific set of eligible uses of funding that is listed within the Notice of Funding Opportunity on our website, and is also a part of the CHIPS Act statute requirements. Investing in workforce development is one of those eligible uses. If you're interested in kind of learning more about how CHIPS dollars can be spent, certainly would direct you to our FAQs on our website.
Okay. Now here's a question that we haven't seen before. Is there a priority to serve school age providers with these resources, or is the focus only on the birth to 5 years, as many issues for access and workforce are similar, and especially in the summer, the off hours of schools?
I think, again, what we're looking for is what's going to be responsive to the needs of workers. So if what you're seeing in your worker community is that the data showing that actually there's a huge gap in, after school, and you want to think about how you can potentially combine solutions for the type of challenges you see with 0 to 5 and gaps in the childcare system beyond that, I think it's a matter of, are you really looking to solve what your workers need? Do you think that will increase labor force participation? And those are really the considerations that we give to these type of applications.
And then here's one. It says, I'm seeing a lot of mention of center-based programs. And I think you did talk a little bit about family childcare, but how will you be leveraging licensed home-based care like family childcare? Can you be a little more, give a little more on that one, Liat?
No, absolutely. I mean, what we believe we've seen with what's happening across the board is that different families need different types of solutions. And certainly those solutions are varied, and they include, some people will prefer facilities that are near work, right? Some people will prefer to have a network of home-based providers available to them that are near to their home or that give them more choice, right? So again, I think what we're really looking for is employers to understand what the needs and preferences are of the workers that they're serving, and making sure that the type of solutions they're employing are going to benefit them. Because ultimately, right, just like you would with any other kind of analysis, you want to make sure the services you're providing are adding the most amount of value. Otherwise, you're not going to see those type of offerings translate into the type of talent attraction and retention and productivity metrics that employers need to see. So ultimately, that's what we expect, is really a user-focused design process from the employer side, depending on what their workers need.
I think this is another question following on to one that's been asked previously, but will childcare solutions be reviewed for effectiveness? I think there's a lot of questions coming in here on accountability is what I think we're hearing here. And I do think there is some concern, around this is will companies be able to propose something and then drop it?
Again, I think that we are going to be creating a process by which we are looking at accountability and the different ways that we will be able to follow up with applicants, right? So it's certainly top of mind for us as well, and we are working on those elements as part of this.
We've had a lot of conversations about this, and I think one of the more interesting was here recently when we started to talk about, rather than just looking at this from just because there's a chip company coming, and I think this would be true of all of the Department of Commerce or the Chamber, is how do we spur more planning at the community level? And is this a way to start thinking about what do we really need to do in communities to address the needs of all workers? And I think we're sort of backing in through this process to a possible strategy or blueprint for how we move forward with childcare at the local level. And I'd be curious as to your thinking on that. I know you're really inundated right now with just CHIP, but what else can we learn from this? And I think that's what people are struggling with here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the types of lessons that we're learning in this process is that we, I think, in many places have to really come to the table and solidify a vision for what are the elements that need to be in place in order to make it easy for people who are investing in childcare, whether that's the government, whether it's employers, whether it's families, to actually engage with childcare. We know for each one of those stakeholders, there are great challenges in the operationalization of solutions, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we talk about, yes, how stakeholders can come to the table as investors in care, and how do we actually reduce some of the behavioral barriers there are to being able to engage with the system. And of course, we know that that's true, again, for each one of these stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned that too. I think some of that gets to the hours. We really do need to think about how we answer the needs of parents more globally in this country. Here's another question. Is this project making the gap of haves and have-nots greater? What is the government responsibility for childcare around that issue? Any thoughts on that? I think what that gets to, and we've had this conversation before, is the fear of also displacement of children. And we've had that conversation many times, but will this, make people who are in the chip industry itself better paying jobs, more childcare, et cetera, and leave others behind? Is there any thought been given to that? Maybe that's a good one, Jessie, for you to take.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to your point, talking about displacement and these other issues related to the childcare requirements of the CHIPS Act, we are taking all of this very seriously. And I think one thing that I didn't share during my presentation was that actually no CHIPS dollars have gone out the door yet. We are very actively in the midst of this program. And so there will be a lot more to share on that front soon, certainly. But, one of the really ambitious pieces of this program is ensuring that it's creating, high quality, good paying jobs, and that there is a broader impact piece of this program. And specifically, it is a part of the evaluation criteria, which we didn't go into today, but really, how are we thinking about through this process, through these investments, where applicants can be making broad-based investments in a community? And that is, we can talk at length about the different evaluation criteria required for this funding opportunity. But there are 6 evaluation criteria. National and economic security is the primary lens, but community investment, as it relates to sort of this broader impacts program priority and evaluation criteria, is also a key one of those 6, in addition to workforce development. So we are actively asking applicants to be thinking about how this investment benefits workers, certainly, but also benefits the broader community.
And I think I'm looking at the clock and we're getting near the end here, but so this is a question that came in that I think is a really good one to end the conversation on. To each of you, I think, from your perspective, what will the success of this program look like? Jessie, let's start with you.
Absolutely. I think there are many dimensions upon which we can talk about success. To highlight a few, certainly helping protect economic and national security is an absolutely critical measure of success. Helping position the United States to be more competitive and to be able to produce this critical technology at home and to invest in innovation at home, all absolutely critical. In addition to that, certainly being good stewards of taxpayer dollars and ensuring that the investments that the government has made here are of benefit and are responsible is very critical as well as a measure of success. Those are the 2 kind of key pieces that Secretary Raimondo often remarks upon, and certainly creating good paying jobs and creating opportunities for members of underrepresented communities to be brought into this workforce, to be a part of the prosperity that we anticipate this program creating, is another key measure of success.
Liat, how about you?
So, of course, in terms of the CHIPS program, ultimately what we need to make sure of is that we have the workers needed to build and operate the fabs that we are set out to build here. In terms of successes for childcare is quintessentially a public and private sector issue. And I think this is really an opportunity to think about how do we leverage this point in time to act on that in the best way and to set a stage for the type of care realities that families face. At the end of the day, childcare is 24/7, 365 days a year. And we will need public investment and private investment to work together in order to really meet those really comprehensive needs of workers, and especially the type of workers that we will need in CHIPS, to make CHIPS a success, which are workers that often work shift work and non-traditional hour work, and for whom many of the public sector solutions may not always be able to resolve all of their childcare needs, right? So I think a lot of the success in this is having both sides of the house come to the table.
Mm-hmm. Caitlin, how about you? You're muted.
My gosh, my apologies. There's so much of what was said that I agree with. I think there is a role that the business community can and will play in childcare in a meaningful way. I think we've heard several times on this call alone of craving for examples of what does that look like. We at the Chamber have spent a good deal of time combing through examples and putting those out to the world. But what I'm really excited about is the opportunity to look at what comes from this and showcase what does that mean when we think about community-led approaches to childcare and the role that the business community plays in that. And, personally, as a mom of 2 kids that are in childcare right now, right, like this is a personal decision for every parent. Thinking about the childcare need that they have is a personal conversation and a personal decision, and having options for care that spans outside of just one, right, is important for all individuals, and certainly for manufacturing, but really every single industry. So I'm excited that we'll be able to hopefully pull out great examples from this moment. And I think importantly, partnering with BPC and you, Linda, and your team to bring states together to look at these examples and figure out what's working and how do we expand these in all communities.
Well, I'm always the pragmatist, and I have to say my vision of what this will look like is that that table has been set at the end of the day in every community in this country, and that we have business and the faith community and everyone at the table to solve the problem that we have, that it's not just going to come from one sector. It's got to be multi-sector. And I think, as I said in the remarks earlier, I think that is what we hope to see coming out of this work, that we set a new model in this country for how we have this conversation in cities and towns across the country. So I want to close now and thank each of you for joining us, and especially to Jesse and Liat for being good sports and taking the questions as they came in. And we appreciate all the work you're doing on this, and we look forward to continuing the partnership with you and certainly with the U.S. Chamber Foundation. So that's it for today. Thank you, and we will be getting all of these materials out to our audience as soon as we can. So everyone have a great day.